Hi there, and welcome to this ESS Environmental Studies and Systems um, revision video. And today we're continuing 8.1 and looking at 8.1 Part B, which is the prediction of climate change, how we can predict, population change, how we can predict population country. So in video one of this one, so please look back at part one video if you haven't. We looked at demographics and we looked at population, studies of dynamics of population change. And we said population across the world is going up, but the rate of which it's going up is actually slowing down. And obviously that could link to stuff like limited resources. So we looked at two theories about that. But we also said it links to something called fertility rates. So a fertility rate of 2, which is the idea that every 2 adults will have children together and have 2 children, would lead to a steady population, and that in the world would lead to about 10.1 billion people by 2100. If the population rate goes higher, that could lead to 15.8, or lower, it could drop to 3.6. And fertility rates are seen as dropping globally due to different reasons. So why do people have large families? So obviously our population in the world has massively increased. And this is due to generally a number of reasons that are not correlated to the GDP of a country or personal wealth, but are due to different reasons within the country. So the first reason is that there is some countries a high infant mortality rate. So if there is a poor health service and low success rate in survival of children, then that could lead to people having more children in order to compensate for the potential loss. Old age security. So in some countries, there will be a lot of cultures where younger members of the family look after the older members of the family, and it's a passage that you have to fund and look after your parents effectively between the children. Therefore, the more children you are, the more likely you're going to be looked after better in old age. That is being deducted slightly these days because of more pensions systems. Children in some countries can be seen as an economic asset. So, for example, if you work on or own a farm, the more hands on that farm, the more better money you might make. And also it can be because you get more money from the state in some cases if you have more children. Status of women across the world is unfortunately not equal, and therefore in some cases this could be due to the fact that women are not allowed to use contraception in some countries. It could be due to rape, it could be due to different reasons like that. And the last one, lack of contraception or a lack of knowledge of contraception or a lack of availability of contraception in less economically developed countries could be a result as well. So if we want to reduce family size, how do we reduce a family size? Well, the first thing would be generally linked to education. If there is education about contraception, education, generally the better educated someone is, the more likely they are to go into a higher level job, and they might value other things other than having children. Improved health means that we may have less children because we may not have as many children in order to, in case to make sure they all survive. Available contraception, increased knowledge of contraception, enhanced incomes. Generally, higher income families have less children. And one of those reasons is because you worry less about people looking after you as you get older. Increased resource management, so you can have better resources, having less effects on local people, and that can also contribute. So what we can represent populations with is something called a population pyramid. And a population pyramid shows the different numbers in a population at different age groups. So on this population pyramid here, you can see that, so let's choose an appropriate colour, there we go. We have different ages as you go up. So this group here represents 0 to 4, then 5 to 6, then 10 to 14, etc. And what this shows me about the population of Mozambique in 2014 is that Mozambique is what I would call a bottom-heavy country. So there are more young people. So if you look here, so we're somewhere between, let's say this is about 2, and then up here we're about 2. So there's approximately between 4 and 5, because it goes both sides, million young people between the age of 0 and 4, because we've got male and female here, so we're taking into account both. And then as you go up in the age, there are less and less females and less males. So if we were to predict what's going to happen to this population in the future, I would say the population will grow because these younger groups of people here are not yet at reproductive age, and in 10 to 15 years time or 20 years time they will be at reproductive age, and then they will have children. The population is top heavy, sorry, it's not top heavy, it's very thin at the top, so these people will generally die out, and they will be replaced by the current people that are further down as a result. And you can also tell here that like the life expectancy isn't amazing in that point. So here you could see you can compare different things on these graphs, and you need to be able to use them to do so. So a narrow base shows in this example a small number of children. So you've got a narrow base, you've got a wider base, meaning more people at that age, and you can see some different things. If you have indents, i.e. where bits where it suddenly goes from up to down, you may have higher rates than normal in those years when people were born, maybe in famine and stuff. You might have bulges which show immigration in some cases, and you may have high infant mortality rate, which is why it might be low at the bottom. Here you can see that women live longer than men because there's more women at the higher ages than at men as a result. So you get different pyramids which show you what is happening to different populations. So if you get a bottom heavy pyramid like number 1 here, okay, what this shows you is there's more babies being born, and that will seek forward to reproductive age, so your population is growing rapidly. If it's more closer, so the bottom of the pyramid is close, it's not as stepped up, you will get a population that's increasing but a slower increase. If the populations are similar at all ages, so you can see here in Japan, Italy and Greece, the population is very, very similar, and it's not getting wider or thinner as you go up or down, then you have a stable population. And if the population starts off really thin at the bottom and is wider as you go up, that means you've got more older people past reproductive age generally, and therefore you've got less children, so your population is declining, which happens in a lot of highly economically developed countries. So what generally happens is we see something called a demographic transition model, and this is the pattern of decline in mortality and fertility of a country as a result of social and economic development. So if we have a look at this and we look at it from each stage, so stage number 1 here is if you have a country which is in a very early position, so let's say it's currently a third world country, and if we watch how that changes to become an economic powerhouse in the future, this might happen. At first you have a stationary population, and the reason you have a stationary population is because you have a relatively high death rate and a high birth rate. So the death rate's in black, the birth rate's in green here, and therefore your population generally stays stable. Okay, and that is because you have a high birth rate, high death rate, and as a result your population remains stable, and therefore a lot of children will be born because lots of them will die earlier, so you'll have high levels of childbirth, but then someone will die, and often disease, poor medical knowledge will result in this stability. So if you've got a high birth rate and a high death rate, they obviously cancel each other out. You then go to early expansion. So this currently is happening in countries like Egypt, Kenya, India, and this is when the birth rate is high. So the birth rate maintains its high level, as you can see here, okay, as it was before, but this time the death rate is starting to decline rapidly. So if your birth rate stays the same and your death rate declines, you're going to have more people surviving to reproduce and have children themselves. So what happens then is you get a very rapid increase in your population, and that might be due to different reasons. Your death rate might be declining because of better sanitation, it might be declining because of better healthcare, due to more fitness, due to less dangerous jobs, things like that. You then go to the late expanding era, or phase I should say, and this is when the death rate continues to drop but then starts to level out to a natural low, and the birth rate also starts to gradually decrease as well. So what will happen here is your birth rate is still greater than your death rate. So if you look at the difference there, you've still got a greater birth rate than death rate. So your population will increase, but your population will increase slowly as a result. Okay, now if your population is increasing slowly as a result, it will it will keep going up, but obviously it's starting to curve off as you get to the top of this graph here, you can see. And that is going to be sort of changing the dynamics moving forward. So then what happens is we get to a low stationary phase. So examples this were USA, Japan, France and the UK. And this is where the population now is leveling off. It's becoming this level plateau stage. So it's becoming a fairly stable country. We still have a low death rate, but our birth rates continue to drop and drop and drop until they almost equal the birth rate. And at this point, your population will be stable, you'll have no increase. Now, why has this happened? Because we have low death rates, because we've got good health care, we've got good water supplies, good sanitation, things like this. But then as populations get bigger, family planning might be better, improved stage, like increased quality of life. People might not necessarily want as many children because they don't need them to look after them, and also there might be later marriages because people are more worried about careers, etc. in their life. When we get to the final stage then, and this is questioned sometimes, but there is a decline stage because you may actually end up with less people being born than are dying, so the death rate doesn't go back up, but there's more and more people dying of old age. And at that point, you get very low birth rates, you get very low death rates, and you might actually get a decrease in population because your death rates become higher than your very, very low birth rates. And this is all happening again because of a change in our way of life. So the population pyramid that we talked about earlier on actually directly linked to the stages of the DTM. So if you see here stage 1, when a population is getting bigger, this is because you will have a high birth rate, okay, and a rapid fall in death rates. So all of a sudden your population at the bottom is bigger, and therefore but your people are living longer as well, so your population increases. At stage 2, your population continues to expand because more and more people are surviving, so there's less people dying, so you get wider at the top, but even wider at the bottom, okay, because you're getting more younger people. And then you eventually then reach this stationary phase where you get an equal number of birth to death rates, and then eventually you'll start to contract because your birth rates at the bottom will start to get smaller as a result. It doesn't mean your deaths have got any bigger, it just means you'll get less. And there are limitations of this model, so this model is important to understand how populations can change, but it doesn't work perfectly. So when they did these models initially, they didn't have this 5th stage, which I said was sometimes questioned by people. It was only added when countries like Germany had a population decline, because they didn't think that would actually start to happen. There's the fall in death rate in this 1st stage here, or the 2nd stage here, I should say, is not as steep as originally suggested because movement often, when countries start to develop economically, often goes from country to urban areas, and that can create slum areas where death rates are still quite high. It doesn't count for diseases such as AIDS and coronavirus and things like that, which will have affected different countries in different ways. And it is not, the fall in birth rate is also not as rapid as originally theorized because of different reasons, because education and religion do not always appear at the same rate for women in countries as they have for men as conditions improve. Some countries, industrialization has been a lot more rapid as well, meaning sudden changes, and it does not account for failed states. So some countries have become economically viable for a very short period of time and then collapsed, and that is not going to follow the same pattern. So if the government wants to reduce the growth rate, it can introduce certain policies. So pension schemes will often mean that adults rely less on children as they get old, and therefore there is less need to have multiple children. In some cases, the change in how the government works means you can lose earnings if you have children. So therefore, if there aren't benefits to look after you, there's less of an intention to have children. The increased education available and contraception available, or availability of the contraception or education about it, will increase the likelihood of less children. Smaller urban accommodation may mean less children. So people move into the cities, they realise they live in very small flats, for example, and they can't actually afford to have children in that habitat. And education being directed more towards females means that females become more empowered, become more successful, and therefore are less likely to have children from a younger age. If you want to increase growth rates, policies that can do that are often agricultural development and increased public health and sanitation, which results in less death rates, because that's one of the main ways to increase the population, stop people dying. Lower taxes, which means then that people can again survive longer. Access to free state education, which is everyone gets a higher quality of life and therefore may live longer again. And immigration is obviously a big thing. The immigration of workers to certain countries has increased the population significantly.